So about to there. 2.3 I think it was, right? Might be a little bit too feminine, but we'll see. And again, I'm going to grab these tangent handles and just weight them. Now it's not playing back in real time, so I'm going to set it to play every frame free, just so I can see whether the motion's smooth. Now that action's happening too quickly on the feet. It's the same with the foot controller there. So it's going to this sort of solid position too quickly, so I'm going to grab that and pull it back. So high, you need a strength most don't possess. Or has it ever come down to do or die? You got to rise above the rest. Tested. I'd like to think that if I was, I would pass. Look at the tested and think there before the grace go on. Might be a coward, I'm afraid of what I might find out. Never had to knock on wood, but I know someone who has, which makes me wonder if I could. It makes me wonder if that's happening a bit quicker now. I just sort of pulled that forward 2 frames so that the stomp is happening much quicker. And that heaps better. Yeah, there's a lot of movement on the body, but I'm kind of just ignoring that for the time being. So I'm going to go ahead now and basically try and tease that information out. It actually might go into my curve controller here on my y-axis especially, and weight out these tangent handles so that there's a much sort of believable sense of weight. And I'm actually just going to do it on the top ones. And we'll see how that looks in playback. And for these bottom ones, I'm actually going to reduce the tangent handle. I really want it to look like he's sort of impacting a little bit on the lower
part of this. Not too far so it's really sharp, but just enough to make it look like he's sort of changing direction relatively quickly. Alrighty, so now I'm going to come into my front view, and I'm going to true up this rotation controller. Now, if we remember from class, the upper torso area rotates in the opposite direction than the hip does in all axes except, well, maybe the x-axis for rotation, depending on how you got your scene set up. So in this case, frame 16, that 23 was going to be a 23 instead of a minus 23. So we should have this rotation where he's staying relatively straight now. Relatively. The frame 8's, his body rotation is going to be opposite to his legs. It's on the Z, so I'm going to grab the Z axis. And then just key selected. It's really sort of mincing it now, but his body weight's going to also come over as well. So I'm going to grab this controller and tilt this body over towards that leg. I've moved it over -2, so I'm going to move this over to roughly about there. And this is also the down frame for this part of the body as well, so I'm going to add the squash in there. And now I need to do the same thing to these curves that I did to these curves. I'm going to go in and sort of focus on these curves that I've got. Got my rotate Z, get rid of these, make sure I true these out, and this animation will start to look a lot cleaner just by making these small little edits. And I did weight these ones on the other one, so I'm going to weight these as well. Go ahead and fix these back up again. And get rid of these, weight these tangents, translate X, focus on these, get rid of this, straighten these out, weight these center ones, pair the tangents, and again just with up and down. It's only going up and down by a little bit, but I'm going to grab the tops and I'm going to blow these out so my curves look a little more weighted, so it falls a little bit heavier. I'm going to grab the bottom ones and do the opposite. And there we go. And as we can see by doing it, the animation starts to already look much smoother. It's very important to make sure that we sort of use the same sort of adjustments to our curves over the course of a controller that's controlling another controller. So in this case, that hip controller is controlling the upper torso controller. So if I have weighted curves on my hip controller, but non-weighted curves on the controller that one is controlling, in this case the torso controller, then we're going to get animation that looks mismatched, and it's going to start to look jerky because there's too much happening on top of that controller. But if both controllers have relatively similar curve structures, so the edits that we do on both sets of curves are relatively similar, then we start to get much smoother motion, and the two animations sort of blend together much easier, much nicer. So by that, just to give you a quick demonstration of what I mean by that, so if we come and have a look at my, let's look at my rotate Z for example. So my rotate Z is this S sort of curve, and I've done the same things to it. So I've gone in and I've aligned my tangent handles, and I've used my weighting to sort of blow these out a little bit so that he sort of stalls at this point of that rotation. And if we come up and have a look at this controller up here, we'll notice that I've done very much the similar thing. Now the curve may be different, but I've done the same edits to it. So I still have my tangent handles in line with the tangents, and I've still gone in and grabbed these tangent handles and just sort of weighted them out to stall the rotation in that particular point. And by doing that over all of these curves, my animation is going to look much more matched, and it's going to look a lot smoother as it runs through. Now we've got the sort of body and torso section happening. We could probably go a little bit more downward motion on this, but we'll sort of sort that out as we go along, when we're really trying to add some heavy weight to this character. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of start working on the arms. So when we come back, we'll start working on the arms for this character. Process to just go through and check all our curves, just have a quick look at the curves to make sure there's nothing like this going on, so there's no sort of stray keyframes anywhere. And now we've got a relatively decent animation that we're sort of at that stage where we can start cycling it now. However, just before we do that, I'm actually going to just do a few more edits to things like the feet. I'm going to add just a little tiny bit more sort of rotational information to convey a little bit more realism on these feet. So when the foot comes up into this position, I want it to actually sort of droop down to one side a little bit as well. So I want it to sort of keel over this way a little tiny bit as it's coming up. And I'm going to specifically go into my rotation value. In this case, it's the Z axis, as we can see on the controller, and I'm going to key the selected on just the Z axis. So we should see that the rotation of the foot comes out, and then it comes down, and that's looking much nicer. Let's make sure I set my timeline back to 32. It's easy to forget not to do that one. So the foot's leaving the ground. Yep, excellent. And I'm going to do the same on this side. So as the foot leaves the ground, I want it to splay out to one side. And I'm going to key the selected. And I'm going to go into those controllers, so my Rotate Z controller. And that point there, I really want that to happen pretty quickly actually. So once the foot leaves the ground, I want that to get to this position a little bit quicker. So I'm going to stall the topmost point, or the maximum rotation value at this point, which is about 11 or whatever. So I'm going to do that by weighting this tangent. So I'm just going to grab this tangent and weight it out a little bit so it gets to this high point a little bit quicker. So it'll sort of stall there, and then it'll move a little bit slower into this next position, and I should give it a little bit more believability, hopefully. And what I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to come back and have a look at my Rotate Z on this side, and there's no real weighting from the base. So this one here, I think what I've done is I've actually probably gone in and just grabbed all curves on one side and weighted them. So this tangent handle here for my Rotate Z has already got like a little bit of weighting done to it, and I don't want that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to plateau all of these curves on this Rotate Z, and that will sort of just default them back to the generic version. So again, at the most curviest point, or the maximum curve value point, I'm going to splay out this weight of this keyframe a bit. Now, something else that I would expect to happen is once the foot gets to its backmost position, I would expect the foot to sort of flare out just a fraction. Now, I don't want it to be a huge effect, I just want it to be a very slight effect, maybe for the last 4 frames going into this key position here. So this key position here will be where the rotation happens, and this will be like a holder, so that it happens from this position. So I'm going to set my keyframe on my rotate Z again in this particular example. So set key selected. I'm going to come to frame 32, and I'm going to just splay it out a little tiny bit. Now, not a great deal. I don't want it to be too exaggerated. And in this particular example, it's fail. It's not the rotate Z, it's the rotate Y. Whoops. So I'm going to key selected, come to frame 32, and then splay the foot out just a fraction. So it's roughly about 10 degrees. And then key that. And I want to copy that number and paste that onto my first frame, because we need to have the same first and last frame. It's always important to make sure we maintain doing that. And key selected again. So now the foot should splay a little tiny bit, and then still splayed, and then it will sort of go back to its normal position over a certain amount of frames here, which is good, which is what we're after. So I'm just going to look at that curve now, just briefly. You can see I've got all this stuff in the middle. We don't need any of that. Just get rid of it. I'm not going to worry too much about adjusting the weight, as it's something that's happening relatively quickly regardless, so I'm not going to worry too much about trying to get nice gravity curves and whatnot with that particular section. However, I'm going to mimic the same effect with this foot as it gets to its backmost point. So from frame 12, that will be my placeholder for my rotation Y, right? Rotation Z. What the fuck? Why is my controller changed? Still local, world, local. Okay, I'm just going to pause it here and I'll come back. Okay, welcome back. Let's see where we're at. I've forgotten completely where I was going and where I was at, but I think I got the rotation on the... Yep. Awesome. So yeah, I was going to go play every frame free just to sort of see it in smooth motion as opposed to jumpiness. Awesome. So I've got the rotation on the feet. The feet are looking pretty nice, sort of plopping down, a little bit of weight. The waist could probably go down a little more, but I'm getting a little bit of clipping, which is making that a little bit difficult. In order to get more downward motion, I'd probably need to reduce how far the feet travel. So at the moment, the feet are traveling through full extension. So I'd probably need to reduce that somewhat so that my character could rise more. And that's just because of this piston. I don't want this piston to pop out of its socket. But just ignoring that for the time being, I might just go ahead and increase the downward motion on this waist controller. So I'm going to my translate Ys, press the F key, and I'm going to extend him at his full height. So at the moment his full height is about there, so I'm going to extend this as much as I can believably. So we can see the pistons sort of starting to pop out of their points there, but I'm just going to it's only a couple frames that happens for, so that's already looking a lot better. He's really sort of compacting down with the weight of his body. Okay, so I'm probably going to leave the animation on this guy roughly at about there. There's all sorts of other things we could do. Like we could go in and we could start animating the fingers and go in and start animating the face and stuff. There's not a great deal on the face, but maybe we could have the jaw sort of flapping around a bit, or the little tiny eyebrow that he's got up here. We can make that go up and down as he walks as well, or whatnot. But this is the sort of base of the walk cycle that we're going for. So I'm going to pretty much leave it here, and I'm going to sort of take this into the cycling phase. So to do that, I'm going to save my scene. So save, it's always important to regularly save, because Maya can be a pain in the posterior, so to speak. And I'm going to sort of take this into my cycling phase. I'm going to go and grab all my curves. So I'm just going to turn everything off, all my polygons off, and just be in a curve mode. And then I'm going to select all of these little controllers here. Actually, I'll just select all of them like so. And then deselect all of this stuff here that I probably should have made unselectable in my rig, but whatever. Okay, so I've got all this information here, all of these keyframes. Now these are my base keyframes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to now take these keyframes and I'm going to cycle them in the infinity. So I'm going to grab all of these keyframes, just press F to make sure they're focused on. In this case they are. I can't see any stray keyframes floating around, which is good. I can see that all of my keyframes end on frame 32 and frame 0. There's a couple exceptions here, and those are probably something to do with parent constraints or something along those lines, or a set-driven keyframe or something like that. But I'm just going to ignore those for now. I've been pretty careful to make sure that I've always had all my start keyframes on frame 0 and 32 the same. So anything like this should turn out okay. So what I'm going to do now is add my cycles, cycle, and cycle. And now I'm going to increase my timeline. I'm going to add it to 200 frames. And we're going to see how it works. We should see that we get a nice little cycle here. Character should be moving along. It's moving pretty well. I might just add an extra keyframe there just to... Cool. So turn my polygons back on. It's probably going to slow it right down because it's a relatively meaty character. But everything's moving along nicely. Everything seems to be cycling very, very well, which is exactly what we want. So now it's time to sort of go in and start working with our offsets to try and make this walk cycle much more believable. So I'm going to come in, and again I'm going to go to just have 32 frames in my timeline so that I can see all the keyframes that I have to play around with.